Happy 2025, everyone. 2024 has been a pretty amazing year for fragrance, and on a different platform, I gave them my top 10 favorite 2024 releases. Here, I wanted to do something a little bit different. Just for you, just for the YouTube community, I am doing my top 20 favorite pickups of 2024. Some of these fragrances are from 2024, others might be from 2023 or before. We got a lot to dive into. I don't want to spend a lot of time yapping, but before we get started, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, do everything you need to do so you don't miss any future related fragrance content here on my channel. Stick around, we'll be right back and we'll get started. At number 20, we're gonna start off cheating already. We are gonna start with a tie. From Bisous, we have a Wondrous Flight, and from Sospiro, we have Vibrato. A Wondrous Flight might be a 2024 fragrance. It's either 2023 or 2024. It's relatively new. Vibrato is a few years older, but they both pretty much do the same thing. They're very similar, fresh and sparkling citrus ginger fragrances. I wore them a lot in 2024, just mainly trying to figure out the differences between the two. And I couldn't find many. If anything, a Wondrous Flight is a little bit more earthy. There's a little bit of an earthiness underneath that bright, sparkling citrus. They are both fire. I don't think I could pick a favorite from the two, but they both deserve to be here. Bisous, a Wondrous Flight, and Sospiro, Vibrato. Next up, we have a pretty new fragrance, a 2024 fragrance from Dries van Noten. It's called Bitter Splash. It's very new to my collection. In fact, I just got it for Christmas. It did not quite make my top 2024 fragrances, but it certainly deserves to be here. It is a fresh, woody leather fragrance. Its versatility through the roof. But on the other hand, it's also pretty niche. I don't think younger guys or inexperienced noses will appreciate this quite like I do. Again, at the heart of it, it's a woody leather fragrance. Dries van Noten is a pretty expensive fragrance house, but they know what they're doing. I enjoy most of their fragrances, and I certainly enjoy Bitter Splash. My next favorite pickup of 2024 is from Penhaligon's. It's called the Blazing Mr. Sam. I believe I did a review of this here, and it's become one of my favorite fall and winter evening scents. It's woody and spicy and just blended so well. If you have time, go check out my review of Blazing Mr. Sam. Next up from the House of Oud, we have Emerald Green, and this is not a 2024 fragrance. In fact, this is a few years old at this point. You smell it and you're certainly taken to Creativentus. It's certainly inspired by Creativentus, but what this does differently, it adds a little bit of warmth from cardamom and it adds a little bit of zing from ginger. In fact, it went in the Absolute Aventus direction before Absolute Aventus. This smells closer to Absolute Aventus than it does the original Creativentus, and for that reason, I really enjoy it. They really ramped up the ginger here, which I love ginger. It made it a little extra enjoyable for me. It's one of my favorite pickups of 2024, Emerald Green. And number 16, we have Baikal Leather from Nicolai. I first smelled this in Vancouver over the summer, and this is really something. I love a good yuzu note. And while this is a leather fragrance, it's more a yuzu fragrance, so you get a lot of freshness from a beautiful yuzu note. But underneath that, you get a pretty dry, realistic leather. This is especially good for anybody that enjoys leather fragrances and wants something that can be worn in the high heat, or at least warmer temperatures. This is not a super heavy leather fragrance, and it's very enjoyable. Nicolai, Baikal Leather. Diving into the top 15 now, let's start off with a 2024 fragrance from the House of Bond number 9. This is called Bond Island. Before 2024, it had been a few years since Bond number 9 had released a fresh fragrance. And they released a couple this year, but I don't think any of them did it better than Bond Island. This is a fresh, sweet, youthful marine fragrance. There's a mint note on top that gives it this vibrant burst of energy. It is really appealing. It's a compliment getter. I think it's unisex, leaning masculine, though my wife likes it, and I've spoke with other women who enjoy it as well. There are a couple aquatic marine fragrances in my top 20, and this certainly deserves to be here. It is one of my favorites, Bond number 9, Bond Island. Next up from Vilhelm, we have Sparkling Jo. This is a 2023 fragrance, but I picked it up in 2024, and this fragrance is pure champagne. I love a good champagne note. Some guys might find this leaning feminine. I find it perfectly unisex. I can wear this very comfortably. I have at least one other champagne fragrance on this list, but nothing does champagne better than Sparkling Jo. There's certainly an effervescence that tickles your nose, and it's fresh enough to wear, spring and summer, but also interesting enough to wear in the fall and winter. It's a mood lifter to me. I enjoy this anytime. Sparkling Jo. Next up, I'm cheating a little bit. There are two from Dua, but there's a reason I'm cheating. We have Moroccan Mint Tea and Neon Walkway. The reason I am cheating is because I wear these layered far more often than I wear them individually. I like these fragrances together more than I like them on their own. Speaking of Dries Van Noten, Neon Walkway is a clone of Dries Van Noten Neon Garden, a beautiful minty iris fragrance. Moroccan Mint Tea, on the other hand, is also a minty fragrance, except for they go the mint tea direction. So you have mint and tea and mint and iris, and when you layer them together, it is truly remarkable. It's 3 fragrances for the price of 2, and actually these 2 together are about $70. And for that price, you really can't go wrong, and I love these together. Do a Moroccan Mint Tea, do a Neon Walkway. I was hoping to include more designers on this list, it just didn't happen. I left out Polo 67, I had to leave off H24 Herbs Vibes. I wanted to include more designers, it just didn't happen. There's one designer I had to include, it's from Kierin Herrera. It's Bad Boy Cobalt Elixer. This is a woody vanilla scent with a fizzy sage note on top. There's a freshness on top of that woody vanilla. It's very sweet, it's very youthful, it's also very appealing. It's a compliment getter. It's a much heavier Bad Boy Cobalt, but at the same time, it smells quite a bit like the original Bad Boy. It's one of my favorite 2024 releases. It's Bad Boy Cobalt Elixir. Next up from BDK, we have Gris Charnel EDP. This has been out a few years. I just picked it up in 2024. However, there is a 2024 release that smells just like it. It's from Moudon. It's called Charisma. It's hard to talk about one without the other because they are both so good at what they do. There are slight differences between the two, but I have worn both of them a lot this year. I've enjoyed both of them a lot this year. Moudon Charisma goes for closer to $100. From discounters, you can find this closer to $150, $160. And it's hard to say one is better than the other. All I know is 2024 was a year for this scent profile. BDK Gris Chanel EDP, Moudon Charisma. I've lost track. I think we're cracking the top 10 now. From Kierin NYC, we have ScentXme. This is the other champagne fragrance. Champagne, grapefruit, passion fruit, cinnamon. I spoke to Mona, the owner of Kierin NYC, and she said that she wanted to create a citrus fragrance for the fall and winter, which makes total sense. But talking about this fragrance, I always say it's a good year-round citrus fragrance. And it can be worn year-round. There's a lot of freshness and effervescence from the champagne and grapefruit. There's a bit of a tropical nature from the passion fruit, but you also get a little bit of warmth from the cinnamon. It's a remarkable scent. It's one of my son's favorite fragrances. It's one of my favorite fragrances. It's a mood lifter. In fact, it makes my heart happy. My son took the bottle Kierin sent us for review, so I had to go buy one. Kierin NYC ScentXme. Next up, let's call it number 9. From Piper and Perro, we have Arid. This is an aromatic woody fragrance with a big blood orange note and a big juniper note. I picked this up in Vancouver this year and I just fell in love with it immediately. This is my kind of scent. I love blood orange and I love juniper. And I can't think of any other fragrances that uses those two notes as the dominant note. And it was a good scent for that Vancouver trip. It's fresh yet deep and just a lot of fun to wear. And it's a very cool under the radar house. Piper and Perro, Arid. Speaking of very cool under the radar houses, this was just recently sent to me by Dear Charlie. The fragrance is called Breathwork. I haven't spent just too much time with this fragrance, but it's certainly one of my favorite fragrances I've smelled in 2024. It is a bright, vibrant, citrus aquatic fragrance, a little bit musky. It has a little bit of a fizziness to it. It kind of reminds you of opening a Sprite. If I was to compare this to anything, I would say this smells like Aaron Terrence Hughes riffing on Sedley. It's not Aaron Terrence Hughes, and this does not smell too much like Sedley. In fact, the perfumer of this is a very talented guy. And with no disrespect to him, that was the first thing that I thought of when I first smelled this fragrance. It smells like Aaron Terrence Hughes playing with Sedley. If that gives you a better idea of how this smells. Performance, outstanding. It's a compliment getter, and again, it's best for spring and summer, but I've thoroughly enjoyed wearing it in December. Again, it's new to me, but it deserves to be here. Dear Charlie, Breathwork. Speaking of a house that's relatively new to my collection, but certainly deserves to be here, this house has made quite an impression on me, a Plume impression on me. The house is called Plume Impression. I have 3 fragrances, and I'll tell you, all 3 are 9s out of 10s, if not higher. They're almost tied, but if I had to pick 2 favorites, it'd be Royal Bourbon and Rivalite Imperiale. These both are spicy, woody fragrances. They both use cinnamon. They're both kind of in that angel share wheelhouse. The difference is Royal Bourbon gets kind of heavy-handed with those boozy notes. And despite being called Royal Bourbon, it's a rum note they use. And Rivalite Imperiale, again, smells pretty similar, it's just not as boozy. They go in more of a fruity direction. They use a beautiful dried fruits note. These are both fire and fragrances that I'll continue wearing in 2025. Probably a lot. Again, fall and winter date night fragrances. We have Royal Bourbon and Rivalite Imperiale. All right, next up, and this one I'm not particularly proud to talk about. It's from the house of Clive Christian. It's called Town and Country. Clive Christian is not a house that I want to like. They charge way too much for their 50 mils, but I bought this from a discounter. I believe this was a tester. I saved as much money as I could, and for the price that I paid for this, it's worth it to me. Town & Country is a beautiful scent. It's elegant, but also versatile. You'd smell like a gentleman day or night any month of the year. It's fresh, but also deep and woody. It's my type of scent profile. There's a little bit of a Creative Ventus vibe to it, and it's a compliment magnet. It's one of my favorite pickups in 2024. Clive Christian, Town & Country. Top 5 now, and the next 2 come from Thomas Kosmala. These are both 2024 fragrances. We have Wild Stride and Star Chaser. I've talked about both of these a couple times on my YouTube channel. I did a deep dive into Thomas Kosmala. If you're interested, go back and watch it. Wild Stride is that smoky batch of Creative Ventus-like fragrance. It opens with fruits and citruses, and it's almost immediately followed by a really smoky note, and it kind of has a Hassavat dry down. The dry down is much less like Creative Ventus and much more like Nishane Hassavat. It's much more mossy and woody. Star Chaser, on the other hand, is much closer to Lafayette Street from Bond Number 9. I'll tell you, it's a little bit more fresh, and this has kind of a marine aspect to it. And what I enjoy about Star Chaser much more than Lafayette Street, it's much more natural smelling. It doesn't have that synthetic fizz you get with Lafayette Street. And the performance is just as good, if not a little bit better. These are not only 2 of my favorite pickups in 2024, but they're also 2 of my favorite fragrance releases of 2024. Wild Stride and Star Chaser. Number 3, we're getting close to the end now. This is from Elysian. This is called Jalous. I got this at Scent Explorer last month in New York, and I've worn this so much since getting it. This is now my favorite pineapple fragrance to date. Up until this point, I would have said Pineapple Vintage Intense 6. I've always said that this is the best pineapple fragrance ever released. Well, since trying this, this is now my favorite pineapple fragrance. This too has some of that Creative Ventus DNA, but I'll tell you the difference. The pineapple note is much more luxurious smelling. The fragrance is much more built around that pineapple note. The pineapple note is the starring player, and the dry down isn't quite as smoky. The pineapple itself has a little bit of smoke to it, almost like a grilled pineapple. But the dry down doesn't include that smoky birch that Creative Ventus includes, but rather it's more of a creamy vanilla dry down. It's sweet and it's smooth, and again, very luxurious smelling. And it's one I cannot wait to wear more in 2025. From Elysian, Jalous. And number 1, and speaking of pineapple vintage, my favorite fragrance of 2024 and my favorite fragrance pickup of 2024 is from Pineapple Vintage. It's called Ultimate Zest. The other fragrance is called Phenom, and while this is not exactly my second favorite pickup of the year, it's in my top 20, and I figured, hey, let's talk about them together. I've talked about this a few times. Ultimate Zest is a kind of a gin tonic-like fragrance. It's fizzy and effervescent. There's also citrus and aquatic and marine aspects. There's a bit of a saltiness to it. It smells very luxurious. It performs very well. It's my favorite fragrance of 2024. And being a little anticlimactic about it, this is Phenom, and there are some similarities between this and Ultimate Zest. This is a citrus aquatic marine fragrance, but it's much more about the citrus, specifically a yuzu note. As I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of yuzu, and this is one of my favorite yuzu fragrances I've ever smelled. Parfums Vintage is a clone house, but these are both original fragrances. If I was to compare this to anything, I would have to compare it to Furpan's Luministe. This is not a clone of Luministe, but rather they took out the lemon from Luministe and added a big yuzu note. It's a little bit creamier, and it's also a little bit bolder. It performs a little bit better than Luministe. It's a beautiful spring and summer scent that could probably work as a signature scent all year. And not only is it one of my favorite fragrances of 2024, it's one of my favorite pickups of 2024. That's it. What was your favorite fragrance pickup of 2024? Please let me know in the comments. Before you leave, please don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell, do what you gotta do to come back and see me next time. I'm Marshall the Scent Addict. Here's to 2025. Come back and see me next time.